Hey guys, it's SD, your host of the Life Picks Relationship podcast, where people with all sorts of backgrounds, challenges, and life experience show us how they make their relationship extraordinary. Hey guys, hope you're having an awesome day and enjoyed the previous episode with Sid as he shared how he moved from India to America and had mixed cultures, the American one and the Indian one, and fitting it all together with his marriage, his arranged marriage. Today we are speaking to a man who built two multi-million-dollar marketing agencies and sold that to become trainer and a coach. He's a TEDx speaker and author of 3 Rules of Marriage. Thank you so much, Bill Carmoday, for being here. I'm really excited to start speaking with you, and I'm curious to know how you went from marketing to being a coach.
Yeah, I just got a sense that when I was helping these large Fortune 100 companies make millions of dollars, it wasn't fulfilling me. I really enjoyed working with the individuals and the people, but the actual development of the brands themselves wasn't a passion of mine. And so when I decided what I really wanted to focus on was helping people, then I really got into coaching and I got into training.
Okay, but now you do coaching especially for marriage, or you do all sorts of coaching?
Yeah, so it's funny. I actually focus on executive coaching. That was the main thing that I started with. But what I was finding was that all of my executive team members that I was working with, we were seeing how the relationship dynamics were actually impacting what they did at work. And so I got very curious about this. And I thought, okay, well, I had some of the best advice in the world from my father-in-law, and I've created a 20-year blissful marriage for myself. So I began writing the book, The 3 Rules of Marriage, and I've used that as a foundation to do relationship coaching. So while I sort of found myself in this space, it's not where I began. I began by doing the pivot of executive coaching, finding only that the relationship that you have impacts everything you do. And so from that perspective, I thought, well, hey, there's a great way for me to connect the dots here.
That's why I'm into relationships, because I really believe that when you have a good relationship, it affects everything. And if it's bad, it also affects everything, but just in the opposite way.
100%.
Okay, so now you just said that you had some really good advice from your father-in-law. What does that mean?
Yeah. So I came from a divorced parents. So at the age of 12, I had that traumatic event when my mom and dad said that they didn't want to be together. And I thought it was my fault, right? I think a lot of kids,
like every kid,
right? Like, what did I do wrong? And so, I certainly experienced that. And when I got engaged with my now wife, Elena, her father and her mother were already 45 years blissfully married. Now, when I say blissfully, I don't use that word sort of casually. They were patting each other on the butt 45 years into their marriage. It's crazy. Like, they were like newlyweds 45 years in. And so I sat down and I asked my father-in-law, I said, what do you do that creates this incredible relationship that you have? He goes, well, I have 3 rules. And I said, wait, stop, let me write it down. So I grabbed a pen and he went through them, and they're so simple, and I'm happy to share them with you, but it's the profoundness of how they get implemented. The actual simplicity of the rules make them easy to always remember. And then what you do day in and day out is what determines the outcomes of your relationship.
Okay, so what are the 3 rules?
Yes. Okay. Number 1 is it's more important to say, I appreciate you than I love you.
Why is that?
Because appreciation is specific. So I looked at this and I thought, well, that doesn't make sense. Love seems stronger than appreciation. But the thing about love is I can be mad at you and still love you. I can be upset at you and still love you. But appreciation is specific. I appreciate you for taking out the garbage. I appreciate you washing the dishes. I appreciate your thoughtfulness in this particular act. And that lands. So it lands differently than I love you, which I could still say it and mean it, but not be like in a good relationship with you in that moment.
You could still be really mad at someone and still appreciate them for taking out the garbage.
Right. But the idea is what that does is it creates a space of connection. And so what happens is you're activating this appreciation gene, which actually hits your gratitude gene, right? And there's sort of like a chain reaction that occurs. And so even if I was hardened right now because we were just in a fight, the act of appreciation starts to soften it. And I start to realize we're in this together. There's a continuous of depth of a relationship when you acknowledge each other for the things that you do for each other and not just take each other for granted.
Okay, but if I am mad now, saying I appreciate you for something is not going to help me.
I understand. And yet what happens is that when you start to continue to foster your depth of appreciation for the other person, what you're doing is you're not taking them for granted. And even if you're mad, and we're going to get into mad in a second. So that's rule number 2 and 3, right? So we'll get into those pieces in terms of what to do in those situations. But the idea of appreciation is it actually transcends because it's specific. And so what happens is every single day that you acknowledge your partner, that you appreciate your partner, you're building credibility in your relationship bank. And so as you continue to build and grow, you're expanding the depth of the relationship. Now, I acknowledge what you're saying. And if you're mad at somebody, you're upset at somebody, this becomes something that needs to be resolved, which is what rules number 2 and 3 are about. So if I can go there, we can come back to this one, or you can keep going on this one, whichever you'd like.
Yeah, let's just keep on this one for a minute. Do you think that if I say, this is like a little bit random, I totally, I like this. Yeah, I think it's great. I think specific, like just saying compliments, oh, you're awesome, doesn't mean anything. And you want to say why. I think that's awesome. But that's awesome. You see, I just said that, but that's not specific. But do you think telling someone I appreciate you for taking out the garbage, does that, by saying it in that way, it's not like thank you for taking out the garbage, it's saying I appreciate you for taking out the garbage, does that almost put like a pressure or some sort of thing that they expect me to take it out?
No, not at all. It's the opposite, right? So I'm acknowledging for what you're doing to contribute to our union. So the idea is it's the opposite of expectation. It is an acknowledgement of who you are being and how you are in our relationship because you're doing these things. And I'm thanking you for them because I appreciate them. And I know you don't have to. You don't have to wash the dishes. You really don't. You don't have to take out the garbage. You don't have to do the laundry. You don't have to go grocery shopping. You don't have to hold the door for me. You don't have to do any of these things. And so if I just ignore them and I just have you do them, I say, love you, love you, love you. Like there's nothing that lands specific to the acts of kindness that you are building into the relationship. The acknowledgement of those acts is what builds the depth of the relationship and the experience, because now it's not general, it's specific. And over and over again, you get a depth of understanding of just how much I appreciate and adore you.
Okay. So I think that it's not, I appreciate you for taking out the garbage. I appreciate the fact that you took out the garbage. There has to be that distinction because or else you're telling the person, I almost don't appreciate you if you don't take out the garbage. That's what it sounds like to me. Maybe different people, it sounds differently, but I don't know.
It's planned differently. And I understand the distinction. I think what it comes down to is what I'm ultimately appreciating is the relationship we have. I am appreciating how we are together in this relationship. And when I call out the specific things, these are your acts of love that I acknowledge and experience. And so it's not from a place of expectation. It's from a place of joy and abundance and appreciation of how much you do that allows us to be in the relationship we have built together. That's the come from.
Yeah. Okay. So let's go on to rule number 2.
Don't keep score. Very simple. And this one was really, really easy for me to get my head around because whenever I would get into fights in my previous relationships, women generally are smarter than men. And so they keep the facts and figures in their head in ways that men just typically have a difficult time doing that. So first of all, when both partners take a score, it's an unfair fight right away because you just don't even have the scorecards. Men typically don't have the same scorecards that women do. They can keep and retain this information much longer than we can. But the second thing is that when we keep score, we're no longer fighting about the present moment. We're fighting about the past. And so when we anchor our relationship in the past, there's only one outcome, which is regret, mistakes that were being made. And so we're no longer being able to be in the moment talking about what's happening. Now, there's a distinction between a pattern of behavior and what you're seeing right now. But if I keep score, it's like, well, you always do this. And then I go back to all the evidence that shows all the reasons why you're a bad person and a terrible part of our relationship, right? And that keeping score is like shoving a bunch of crap in the closet. And eventually you're going to open the door and it's all going to come flooding out. And there's nothing the partner can do if you're constantly keeping score.
Yeah, like you said, it is fighting about the past, not the future.
Yes.
So how do you go about making sure that you're focused on the future and not the past?
Yeah. And in fact, I'll even go one step further. It's focusing on the present, not even the future.
See, that's true. I'm sorry. It's focusing on the present, not the future. Yeah.
But it's a really important distinction because when I'm in the past, I'm anchoring myself to disappointment and regret. When I'm in the future, I'm anchoring myself to anxiety and anticipation. But when I'm focused on the present moment, now we're really talking about the gift that is right now. And so that is when I say the present, that's what I'm talking about in terms of not focusing on the score that has happened in our past. And so essentially, how do I do that? That's rule number 3. So I'll just lead into that one and then we can talk about all of them. The third rule is don't go to bed angry. And so what ends up happening there is that, let's say we have a fight. Now we have a decision to make. It's getting toward bedtime. Either we're going to stay up and resolve our conflict, or I'm going to choose to go to bed. And if I choose to go to bed and I decide, and then at that point, I choose to let it go, meaning like we start over fresh the next morning, because that is the context of the refresh and the reboot that happens every single day. We're starting fresh and we're starting on a clean day, as opposed to carrying forward something else that wasn't working.
When you are really tired at night, okay, this is like a really big debate. I know in general, we discussed this a lot on the podcast before, going to bed angry or going to bed not, and everyone has all different things. The best answer I heard so far, and let's see if you could beat this, is what you do is you go to bed in a good tone, like in a way of setting the things, I still love you, I still appreciate you, everything is still good, we have to work this out. Not going to bed angry at the person, but you're still angry at the situation, not especially at the person. And then in the morning when you're not tired, you could go and figure it out. What's your say on that?
That's great. So I love that. And here's what I love about what you just shared. The rule is being adhered to, that you're not going to bed angry. So what you're doing is you're acknowledging, look, I still love you. I appreciate you. And there's more that we want to talk about in this particular thing. So you make an appointment and you say, look, tomorrow I would like to speak to you further about this because I'm unresolved in this particular conflict. So I want to make sure that we have a conversation about it. But I'm not going to bed angry in that moment. I want to be clear-headed. I can acknowledge that I'm tired and then acknowledge that I want a little more time to be able to discuss this. But at this point, I'm letting go of anger. And now we're talking into sort of what happened and what do we do about it, right? And so from that perspective, we're now starting to rebuild in our relationship, and I'm not coming from a place of anger. The negative emotions is what I'm saying to let go of. And so if you need a little more time, then that's fine. You can sort of say, this is not resolved for me and I would like to speak to you further about it. But in that moment, you're no longer angry about it. You're now thinking about specifically what it is you can do to make things better.
Okay, so how do you just leave go of anger?
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. And this is the depth, right? This is when we get into the real hard part. So what's interesting about letting go of anger is it turns out it's just a choice. And this is what's crazy about this, is that we feel that we get activated by external stimuli, whether it's our partner or relationship, and we start to judge ourselves, we judge our partner, or we judge a situation. In those judgments, we experience anger. We experience negative emotions, frustrations, all of those things. The very simple thing you can do is to first become aware that I am angry. That's the first step. I am angry. I acknowledge myself in anger. Now I start to figure out what is it that's driving that anger. And this is where mindfulness training can be hugely beneficial. When I say mindfulness training, yes, meditation helps. Yes, the other things like that are supportive. But I'm actually talking about literally dropping into your body. So it could be with breath work, right? Just breathing and just sort of dropping back in your body. It could be tactile. I can rub my two fingers together and sort of feel the attention in my body. There's many, many techniques that will drop me back in my body. But this is mental fitness training where I can acknowledge I am angry and I decide I don't want to be angry right now. So I forget the facts, forget all of the things that just occurred, right? All my feelings about those things. I'm gonna put those aside for a moment so I can center myself. And when I drop back into my body, I can acknowledge the anger that I was experiencing, and I can let go of the anger portion of it, saying that's just emotion, that's a sensation, I'm gonna let it ride through me. And now I want to think about what was the triggering event, not just from a place of what you did wrong, which is like, I think where we get it all backwards, but what was my part in it? What was my trigger? What was the thing that activated my anger? Because in that place of anger, now I'm not going to be any good to us in our relationship. I'm immediately going to be activated. I'm going to say things I'm going to regret. I'm going to behave in such a way that I won't appreciate later in myself. When I can let go of the anger, I can focus on the facts and not my interpretation or the story about the facts that I experienced because things that I made up in my head, which may not even be real.
Yeah, I think the best way to say that of story and facts is that facts are something that you could actually say what happened. So she hit me or whatever happened. Right. Hopefully she didn't hit you because that's getting abusive, but that sort of thing. And emotions is anything else. The way you feel, what you think about the person, everything else about that. Yeah. Now, identifying your trigger. Okay. So if you say that I got angry because he did this, there's usually a reason much deeper.
Yes.
That was just a trigger, right? There was something much more. Now that could be really hard and takes a lot of self-awareness. What advice would you give to someone who wants to find what's really triggering them?
When I became a black belt, so I'm now a 4th degree black belt, so I've been teaching this, but when I first became a black belt, my master instructor pulled me aside and said, when somebody pushes your buttons, thank thank them. And I was like, what? And my head was blown open. I was just, what are you talking about? It's like, they push my buttons. How dare they, right? There's like an indignancy about that. Because no, because you shouldn't have any buttons to push. The gratitude is very authentic, because what it shows you is, oh, I didn't realize I had a trigger there. Let me go investigate what that is. So everybody's trigger is different, but ultimately comes down to something totally unrelated to the event. So for example, my mother, most of her life was obese. I was triggered by obese people. And the trigger had nothing to do with obesity. The trigger had to do with my association of health or lack thereof associated with a body shape that was obese. And what it came from was my own fear of becoming obese. And so the trigger wasn't the other person ever. It wasn't my mom. It wasn't another obese person. It was a deep-rooted fear of mine that if I don't be very mindful about my health choices, my eating choices, I will become obese. But when I would interact with someone who was obese, I would be triggered because that fear was being activated in me. It had nothing to do with the other person. And that's true for all triggers. When you start to really unpack it, whatever the triggering event was, it's what is deep inside of you. What is the deep-seated fear? And usually it's about some fear of I may not survive or I won't be loved. So if you can really get to the heart of it, it's like the depth of our fears are typically survival-based.
Yeah. So now I understand I was triggered and I know that there's something there and I'm trying to get to their root. How can I go about that? What advice would you give us?
So it's really to unpack it, to sit there. There's probably 100 different ways to get to this answer. I'll tell you a couple of the most common ones. Journaling, for those people who like to write, this is a great thing to just take a time out. And if you can't do it right then in that moment, come back to it. Like write down exactly what was happening, just even 1 or 2 sentences of what was the experience of the trigger. And then journaling can be a great way to unpack, where you free flow and you say what was happening in that moment, what was going on. You unpack the experience and you look for the clues of what connected back to something deeper and keep going. Another technique is the 5 whys. Whenever you really want to get heart of anything, you ask the question, why, 5 times. So what happened when I was being triggered? Da, 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 da. I answer the question. Now, why was I triggered by that event? And then I answer that question. Now, why was that the thing that got me to be triggered, right? So you go deeper. It's like peeling back a layer of an onion. Why? By the time you get to the 5th why, you're there.
I heard that with the 7, and I found that usually it happens when you ask the 5th or 6th, like,
yes.
Yeah. So like 7, either 5 or 7, but it's the same idea. Yeah. It's really good. It's also really good to do that with another person. You could do that writing, but when you have another person, then it's someone on the outside keeping you focused while you go through it.
And the other part of it too is when we look at our triggers, it's really understanding and connecting to the emotion. So the 5 whys gets to the heart of it. And that's sort of the left brain intellectual version. Then there's the emotional energy shift, which is to say, like, what is the experience of the trigger? And so am I experiencing anger or rage? There's a difference, right? Like
big one.
Right? So like really name the emotion. Like, am I mildly perturbed or am I really angry or am I enraged? And so there's this whole different distinction of the range of emotions. And then that also will tell me the severity of the trigger. A mild annoyance is still a trigger, but it's very, very like, almost like, do I even need to work on this? Whereas something that puts me into white anger or rage, it's like, wow, there's some really deep stuff here that I get to work on.
Yeah. What I do is we'll tie in all those 3 things you just said. I do something called Creative Journal Expressive Arts, where we journal with the non-dominant hand together with the dominant hand. So you have the why part, the logical part of the brain, and you answer with your non-dominant hand and you access the emotional part of the brain. So you could journal, get there, write your questions of why with your dominant hand, answer your questions with your non-dominant hand, and you'll get that emotional answer that you're looking for.
I love it. I love it. Like I said, there are 100 ways to get to the bottom of this. I love your example of this creative journaling. That makes a lot of sense. And the non-dominant hand is a great way to access the other side of your brain, which again is where we have all of our emotions stored. So that's beautiful. I love it.
Yeah, that is cool. Okay, so let's go back to our situation of a couple who is fighting right before bed over something really stupid. The wife just pushed his button. Noticed he's angry, but he doesn't want to go to bed angry. So he's getting into his body. He's going to do breathing exercises, maybe going to journal afterwards. Now, do you think that by the time he finishes all that, he's not going to be angry anymore?
Yes. If he's committed to not being angry. See, one of the things that I learned in the world of transformation was that we are in control of our emotions and we can switch them like that. That's the crazy part, is that I can be angry and then I can just drop. And it's like, we don't have to stay in any emotion. And the minute we acknowledge that we have the power to shift, we do. So with the part of this, what we're talking about in terms of breath work, or what we're talking about in terms of journaling, is the ability to have a mental shift so that we can actually make a different choice. The minute we get off autopilot, this is the key, right? When I am triggered, I'm on auto reaction. There's nothing thoughtful about my anger. It's like, rah, you did this to me, rah, right? And that's the autopilot that drives our life when we're not careful. And so the idea of getting off autopilot is the breath work or the journaling or any of the techniques that we talked about as a means to sort of become present again. Now that I'm present, I make another choice. How do I choose to feel in this moment? And those emotions are choices. When we say they're not a choice, it's because we're in reaction and we don't feel in that moment we have a choice, but we always do.
Yes, we do always have a choice. I'm not take that away. I'm a very big believer in like you could change your emotions. I think very physically is a really good way. So whether breathing or as like Tony Robbins has with his move, I think is really good and also helps you move out of it. But I do think it's also important just to like put it out there to acknowledge emotions. Like I think that there's way too much emotions are bad. You're not allowed to get angry. Think about it. Like from like a little kid, a mother tells her child to stop crying. There's nothing wrong with crying, right? Just because the mother doesn't know how to deal with the pain or the anger or whatever it is, she's telling her child to stop crying. So you want to realize that you're angry, but then you want to go and take responsibility for the anger and channel it in the right direction.
Yeah. Yes. It's funny. Neil deGrasse Tyson, a huge fan. And one of the things he said recently was about how he and his wife decided that they are not going to stop their children from experiments. And he said, what do you mean? Well, so as a kid, you have your rain boots on, everything. You want to go jump in the puddle. What do most parents do? No, don't do that. But the ability to jump in the puddle, splash, and see the massive amount of water, like that's the childhood innocence, which is amazing. Same thing, like a child grabs a cup or a glass, and the parents immediately go, be careful, don't drop it. Let the child drop it. That's how they learn. Yes, you're gonna have to pay for a glass. Yes, you'll have to clean it up, and it's a little more work for the parents, but that's how we explore our world. So to your point about emotions, same thing. Mastery is experiencing your experience. I am experiencing anger. Allow it to happen and allow it to move through you. When you're going through hell, keep going. Just allow. What resists persists. If I hold on to my anger, it stays with me. If I don't want to have my anger, I allow my anger to go and then just continue out. Look, how long is it going to take? If I have to go into a rage and go beat a pillow up, I can do that for what, 2-3 minutes? And I'm exhausted and I'm done. Anger's
Exactly. I love that because I'm not a parent yet, but I do really believe in just like letting people be and letting them do what they want. So they're going to go and jump in that puddle and they're going to find that so cool. And then they will learn all that about water. And then they're also going to go and see that they're wet afterwards, but we're on the way to the store and we're not going back home and changing our shoes. And if your whole socks got wet, too bad, right? Now that's their way and not their whole life. They're wishing they could jump in a puddle. Later on, if they want to jump in a puddle, then who cares? It's part of fun going and getting wet. It's really like experiencing and living life, like you said, to its fullest, right? Not just, I love that. And I think that's not only with kids. I think that's with partners also.
Yes.
Like just let them be, let them figure it out. We'll be okay.
And that's part of it. I mean, this is one of the biggest tensions in any relationship. And generally it's funny, we have two different viewpoints. From a feminine perspective, women tend to marry men wanting to change them. And men typically marry women because they don't want them to change. And so we have this conflict in this dance where it's like, you're so great at except I want you to be this way, right? Or I love you. Why are you changing? I want you to be exactly who I met when I met at that first date, right? So there implies this tension. And we know that change is inevitable, but progress is not. Progress takes work. And so part of the relationship is, if we want our relationship to progress, what's the work we're willing to put into it so we can continue to have new levels of bliss and happiness, as opposed to just coasting on what we had when we first fell in love.
Yeah, what advice could you give to the men listening to this so that way they could change their perspective and understand where their wives are coming from?
What it comes down to is to going back to the present moment, to what can you appreciate about your wife right now in this moment? So rather than going back to anchoring in the past, right? We're like, hey, I remember how it was when we first dating. I remember how it was when we first fell in love, right? That's anchoring to the past. The question is, we're now in this new moment, new space, new possibility. What is it that I fully appreciate about my wife now? in this moment? What are 3 things that I could appreciate about her right now without having any context of what was? See, that's the idea, is that when I think about the context of what was, I'm anchoring everything and I'm comparing it. And that is the worst possible thing you can do, because you'll never be free. You'll never truly experience freedom if you've anchored yourself to the past.
Yeah. Now, how do you get the balance between the past, learning from the past, being present in the moment right now, and anticipating the future?
So this is the idea of being present and anticipating the future is, by being present, I am at choice. I see all the paths in front of me. What ends up happening is, for most people, they don't feel like they have a choice, because they experience the path they're on without an understanding that they can choose any moment of any day to change direction. We have that power. And so what ends up happening is, when we're on automatic, when we're on exactly the way we do things, always the way we do them, we're going to think that we don't have a choice. That, well, I'm in a dead-end job, but I can't leave it. Why? Well, because I need to replace the revenue. Okay, but that's a choice. Like, I choose to replace that revenue. Now suddenly I'm building toward a future whereby I choose to change the revenue. I'm in a dead-end relationship. Why? Because I'm resigned to the fact that this is how things are. Okay, so this may be what is so, that's present, but now what? What do I want to do in order to grow or change the relationship in a positive way? And so the anticipation of the future is not being driven by it. That's what I see as the distinction. It's, I choose the life that I want. And so again, we're making all this stuff up anyway, so we might as well make up the best story, right? So from that perspective, I say, what is the kind of relationship I'm committed to having? And that's a present moment thought. That's not even a 5, 10, 15, 20-year thought. That's in this present moment. What kind of relationship am I committed to having? And then I am being in such a way that I can have it happen. And when it doesn't happen, I can acknowledge, well, what was the gap? What happened? I know what I'm committed to. It didn't happen. What was in the gap? And then I work on that.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, now let's go back to your father-in-law. After you heard these rules from your father-in-law, how did that change your view on marriage, and how did it affect your marriage?
Yeah. So what was beautiful is, I went from having a framework of a broken marriage because of my own parents, to having a framework of a blissful 45-year marriage. Now 65, by the way, 65 years blissfully married. Crazy. And then in seeing that, it was like, okay, I'm going to actually live these rules. This is not going to be some intellectual idea that I put in a drawer and hold on to it. I actually said, let's try them out. Let's see, whenever I'm not in a good place with my relationship, I'm going to go back and look at these 3 rules. There it is. I'm keeping score. There it is. I went to bed angry and started again angry. There it is. Like, I didn't say enough appreciation from my wife. She doesn't know how much I appreciate her. So when I went back to these rules, it was like I became a self-cleaning oven. So that no matter what was happening in the relationship, I had the power and the control to change it to the way I wanted to see it. Because here's the thing, I can't change my wife, ever. But what I can do is I can be in a certain way that invites her in to my ways of being, and invite her to the kind of relationship that I'm committed to having. And that's the distinction. It's not about changing the other person. It's about looking inside myself and saying, what are the things I can do to actually take my relationship to the next level? And in doing that, I become a self-cleaning oven, and I hold a space for us to have a blissful marriage.
Yeah. Now, what does your wife think of these 3 rules?
She loves them. She loves him because there's her father. She respects the hell out of her father. She's seen the kind of marriage that they've created. She came from a very different background. She saw what it was for 2 people to be in love with each other in such a way that 65 years later, they're still in love with them as much today as they ever were. In fact, they're more in love with each other today than they were when they first fell in love. And that's just a beautiful model. So like, she knows the power of these 3 rules. That's why she's the co-author. We did this together.
And how has this working in marriage affected your own marriage?
It's really got me to appreciate just how great I have it. And so one of the things I say at the end of the book is, when both partners believe that they're the lucky one, you both are. So there's never been a moment in the 20 years my wife and I have been together when I didn't say to myself, I'm the lucky one. I'm the lucky one in this relationship. I married up, right? I'm lucky that Elena's in my life, and it was so fortunate. And here's the thing, she feels the same way. If we have any arguments that are long-standing in our 20-year relationship, it's who's the lucky one. And it's crazy because we both know that we're the
best argument to have.
Right? I know that I'm the best lucky one. I know that I am. And she knows that she is. And it's crazy because, both of us have evidence to prove that we're right.
That's so awesome. I like that. I love that. Okay, one last question. What advice would you give to someone who wants to have an extraordinary relationship?
Yeah, I think it starts here. It's if these are not the 3 rules that you want to adopt, that's fine. But what is the framework for an extraordinary relationship for you? See, extraordinary relationships don't happen by accident. They are designed. One of the most powerful questions my coach asked me is, are you designing your life or are you managing your circumstances? In most relationships, both couples are managing their circumstances. They're managing how they are together. They're managing what shows up in the space. That's not what we did. We began our marriage by designing it. Here's the kind of marriage we choose to have together. We both agree to these 3 rules so we can support each other, not from a place of sword, but a place of shield. Like, we can acknowledge each other when we're out of bounds. And immediately it helps us come back into where we agree we want to be together. So, I also say the other part of it too is, if you're willing to do the work in the relationship, you'll bear the fruit of the relationship. If you're not willing to do the work, then you're going to get whatever you get.
Yes. Well, awesome, Bill. Thank you so much. Guys, if you want to get his books, 3 Rules of Marriage, you know what it's about. Get it in depth so that way you could really make your marriage extraordinary. And if you want to work with Bill and get your first hour free, go to billcardomi.com. I'll put all the links in the show notes so you'll know exactly where to find him. Thank you so much, Bill. This was awesome. Did you enjoy that episode? Could you do me a personal favor and subscribe and leave a review? It would mean a lot to me. Thank you so much and have an awesome day.